In this video, we're going to show you how to cross stitch on a t-shirt using waste canvas. So the first thing you want to do is pick out the right pattern for your t-shirt.
So you want to choose a pattern that you look at really closely and see, is this something I'm going to be able to do on fabric? Now I've chosen The Beekeeper by Sandra Cox Vandesil, which is put out by the Bee Cottage. So the problem with this pattern, and there's only one problem, is that the bees are done 1/1 and everything else is you're going to stitch over 2. So when you choose your waste canvas, now they come a couple of different ways. So this is a 14 count. Okay. And this is actually 8.5 count. So you're going to look at your pattern and you're going to do the math and decide, how big do I want this to be? If I do this in 14 count, the pattern's only going to be 5.3 inches by, I think, 4.9 inches. It's going to be really small. So rather than using a 14 count waste canvas, I've decided to do the 8.5 count. The other thing about the 8.5 count is that because, as you can see, the holes are bigger, it's going to be a lot easier for me to do these itty bitty bees in 1/1. Okay. If I was doing it on the 14 count, there'd be no way to do it well, I suppose you could, but
it would be smaller.
It would be very tiny, and I don't think it would be worthwhile.
So then materials, what do we need for this project?
Okay, so for this project, you're going to need your pattern, obviously. Waste canvas, a shirt. Pick a color that you like, so you want to make sure that the pattern's going to pop on your clothes. I will use a 6-inch hoop for this. You're also going to need a needle. I'm going to use a tapestry needle.
And a tapestry needle will go through t-shirt material.
But you don't want to use a sewing needle. You don't want to split the waste canvas. If you split the fibers, right. If you split the waste canvas when you're sewing, you won't be able to pull it out later, okay, because it will be attached.
Okay, so no pointy needles with waste canvas if you can help it.
You will want to use a measuring tape. I would recommend you use the Easy Count guideline. We're going to use regular thread when we baste around the outside, but when we go crisscross diagonally to hold the center in place, you're going to want something that doesn't split. You're also going to need something to keep the front of the shirt from being sewn to the back of the shirt when you baste on your waste canvas.
How did you find that out?
You have to ask. If you go to the dollar store,
so this cutting board at the dollar store,
right?
Yeah.
Or it's a t-shirt form, and this form is actually really, really good to put inside the shirt for when you're basting. It's not staying inside, it's just for basting.
And you're also going to need your embroidery floss for your project.
Well, yes.
Did we mention sewing pins, dressmaker's pins in the beginning for materials?
No.
We're mentioning it now. You need dressmaker's pins. You also need a pair of embroidery scissors.
Any kind of scissors will do.
We also forgot to mention you're going to need clips. These are the large Wonder clips. The large ones are going to work better for this project than the small ones. A couple of other tools you might need is a seam ripper, and tweezers are optional.
Might need tweezers. You might need water.
And water. The next step is to get your shirt ready. If you're stitching on a shirt or whatever it is that you're stitching on, we're going to be talking about stitching on something that's 100% cotton. It might be different for different materials.
And by getting it ready, what I mean is some people are going to want to wash their t-shirt first.
Definitely should pre-wash.
She's one of those.
Yeah, because you might need to just if you have sensitive skin, but also cotton shrinks. So if you're stitching on cotton, you're going to want to either pre-shrunk or wash it. And you don't know how the chemicals are going to react to your embroidery floss once you stitch it.
I'm the other school of thought. I don't bother to pre-wash because when I have this all stitched up and I wash it, it's going to shrink. It's going to hold my stitches tighter. But it's a valid point, so do what you like. The other thing you may want to do, and we didn't mention this in the materials list because it is something that is purely optional. This material is stretchable. You don't want to do that while you're stitching. This is not stretchable. If you baste this on right, you might not have any problems. But if it's your first time and you think you might have issues, then you can get fusible interfacing and iron that on the inside of the shirt. So you're going to turn it inside out and iron the fusible interfacing on.
Where you're going to stitch, so that would be the front of the shirt in this case.
But on the inside of the front of the shirt.
So we're going to put this giant t-shirt mold inside the t-shirt.
And then you're going to decide where you want to put the pattern.
Okay. Now this is the 8.5, right? That you're using the 8.5 count?
Correct.
Okay.
I'm using the 8.5 count because the pattern I chose does have quarter stitches in it.
Okay.
And also because I'm not a tiny girl, I'm a big woman and I want my pattern to be bigger than my palm of my hand.
Right, okay.
And you are going to want to measure. I'm going to put this pretty much right up to the collar. Since it was folded, it's easy to see the center of the pattern. If you can't see the center of the pattern, you might want to refold yours and make a little X or something.
You mean
on
the center of the canvas?
Of the canvas. So I have 5¼ inches on this side, 5½ inches on that side. So I'm going to scoot this over a skosh and try again. There's such a thing as just being a little too anal.
So you're measuring from the edge of the fabric to the
edge
seam of the sleeve.
This I'm not going to worry about.
Okay.
I don't want the pattern to be down.
So on
around
8.5 count, you said it'll be how tall?
About 9 inches.
So from here to 4.5, that's where it's going to start, right?
So if it's, yeah.
So it'll start way up here. Do you want it to start that high?
Let me think. Yeah, because I want it centered here. Maybe I bring
measure,
this down
why don't
a little.
you measure down your t-shirt and see how big is 9.5 and where do you want it to start?
9.5 is, well, like that.
Okay.
I guess I want it to be.
So, okay, so from here to here that's 2 inches.
Okay.
So you're gonna want your pattern to start 2 inches from top. Half of the pattern is 4.5 plus the 2-inch leadway, so that's 6.5. So you're going to want the middle to be 6.5 from the neckline.
And it's 6 right now.
Well, no, because you're not there. That's the 0.
Oh, so it already is
so
6.5.
Okay, so that's perfect.
And the only downside about this is once you start your pattern on here, you're not going to want to frog it all out and move everything down because you'll leave holes. I think we're good.
The waist canvas is right where you want it.
Right.
So next,
Pin.
we pin it. Okay.
Yes. You can use any kind of pins. I do recommend if you have them, the ones with the great big colored balls on them, you're going to start here at the neckline. You're going to bring the next pin down a couple of inches and you're going to pin down the middle.
Oh, and this is why you need the piece of whatever in between the front and the back of the shirt, because while you're pinning, you'll definitely go through.
You will, because you have to push down a little bit and go over. I just want to reiterate, you want to make sure that this is straight. This looks straight to me. You don't have to measure everything, but you definitely don't want it at an angle unless that's your pattern.
Unless you're going to stitch it that way.
I mean,
right?
if it's on purpose, fine. Do whatever you like. And you notice that I'm smoothing out the shirt as I go. You want to make sure that shirt is nice and smooth. Use as many pins as you think you need in order for the thing to not twist on you or move. And if you run out of pins, you can also use needles, because I don't know too many cross stitchers who don't have quite an abundance of needles. And you just want to double check that you're still straight, that everything's still right where you wanted it. Nothing shifted while you were pinning it. You still have 5 here. You still have 5¼ there, 5¼ there. We're still 6.5 inches down to the center. The bottom is also pretty good. Next, we're going to baste. We're going to baste all around the outside. If you're not stitching near the outside edge, then you can go ahead and baste it with regular thread. I would recommend using a contrasting color. You can actually baste it right on top of the cardboard or the piece of plastic that's inside.
Okay.
Sometimes that's safer.
Yeah, all right.
Now you can baste it with your tapestry needle. You don't have to have a regular sewing needle to baste it. But I would use some kind of regular sewing thread that you can just cut later and throw away. I'm going to use your bright red. Now you can do this by using 2 threads together, or you can do it by a single thread. It's really a matter of your own personal preference.
For those of you who don't like to use knots in your embroidery, it's perfectly okay to knot this because we're going to be taking it out. It's not going to stay.
I always baste close to the edge because I want the waist canvas to stay flat and I don't want my floss to get caught on edges of the waist canvas. And this way I don't have to worry about how big my, because this pattern has a frame and I don't have to worry about how big the frame's going to be. This basting is going to be well away from my stitching. And you can see I'm not taking tiny little stitches. It can be rather large. You're just holding this in place. You don't have to baste along the pin line. I just happen to be doing that anyway. I'm basically going to baste about 3 squares in on this one. So I know I'm out far enough that it's not going to interfere with my pattern, but I want the edges to be tacked down nicely. And feel free to move this around as you need it. Okay, now I'm at the end of my thread. I'm going to leave that. I'm going to get another piece of thread. Now when I restart this thread, I'm going to start it right next to the other one. And I'm not going to bother knotting it. I'm just going to pull it out till they're kind of similar in length. And then I'm just going to keep going. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back and I'm just going to make a little square knot with these 2 threads. The reason I didn't knot it is because you're going to be tempted to do a knot around the waste canvas threads, and that's going to make it harder for you to pull out later. So you just do this, and then if you want to get the scissors, we're just going to snip this right down near the bottom because they don't matter. They're not going to come out. But that's the easy way to just keep going when you baste.
So notice she's not pulling the thread tight to pucker the t-shirt. The t-shirt is staying flat, the waste canvas is staying flat.
And that's what a basting stitch is. It's just a large stitch so you can fix one piece to the other piece. It's not going to be permanent. And actually, now that we've come to the end, it occurs to me that if I left a longer tail on this side, I could have tied these 2 ends together too. But since I didn't, I'm just going to tie this to the first basting stitch. I'm not going to actually tie it to the waste canvas. I'm just going to tie it to the first basting stitch because later that will be easier to pull out when you're finished at the end. Now here's where we're going to want to use some of the gridding product. What do they call it? Twine?
It's wire.
Wire. We are going to use the gridding wire to go across. You're going to baste it diagonally this way and this way, but you're going to need a little extra because you're going up and down, up and down. Now the reason I'm using the gridding wire to go from corner to corner and corner to corner is because this is where I'm going to be stitching. And if you split your regular thread when you're stitching, it won't come out. Right. You won't be able to remove it later. And the idea is that you don't want it to show. So you're going to take it out later. If you don't have gridding wire, you can use regular thread. But if you do, you need to be extremely aware of it when you're stitching and make sure you don't split it at all. It doesn't have to be perfectly straight. You're not using it for counting. So if you're a little crooked, as long as you end up going from one corner to the other corner, I find it's easier to aim toward the middle and then from the middle to aim toward the corner. Now if you're smarter than me, you will try and make your threads crisscross in the center, and that'll mark your center stitch for you and make starting your pattern a whole lot easier. Now you'll notice this isn't a straight line. Straight lines are not needed. It's just to keep the waste canvas from moving when you're sewing your pattern. So it doesn't matter. All right, so now we've got, well, slightly zigzag. And now, of course, we can take out all the pins. So I'm just gonna squeeze it a little bit and see if I got all the pins out. Yep. And now we should be able to take the cardboard out of the shirt. I just want to double check. So this is about 12. And this is a 12, and it looks like, see, there's 6 and 6. It looks like I got that about right. It doesn't have to be exact, but like I said, if you start your pattern over here and you end up making it an inch or two one side or the other, it's going to bother you. I mean, it would bother me. So I'm going to be starting my pattern in the center. So I would not start in a corner. I don't recommend that. I start either center middle or center center. Because if you start in a corner and your pattern's going to end up lopsided on the shirt, you're not going to be happy with it. You're doing this much work, let's just take care so it comes out right. Yep.
So next we put the hoop on.
The hoop's going to go in the center. Make sure you're in between your layers. Here's my hoop, here's the back of the shirt. Always make sure, because you don't want to stitch through both layers. Will this fit over here? Yep, it does. stitches. I do use a smaller hoop because I find it's easier for me to stitch. If you think a larger hoop is going to be easier for you, then use what works for you. I do recommend using a hoop rather than stitching in hand, because even though the waist canvas doesn't stretch, the shirt does. So the hoop is going to help you keep your tension nice and even, and it's going to help you keep the waist canvas in place as well. So now I want to talk a little bit about the instructions, because when I first started with waist canvas, this is what I got. Basically nothing.
Oh, don't forget the helpful pictures on the front.
Oh yeah, the helpful pictures on the front. It says, tack waist fabric to target, cross stitch your design, pull waist fabric threads. That's it. That's as much directions as they gave. There's really virtually nothing on the back. And that's for the 14 count to the inch. Charles Craft, isn't that a DMC product?
Yes, it's a DMC brand, but that's old.
Thanks, DMC. Well, it might be old, maybe from the 80s or 90s. I don't know what they show now. Now, this is the one that I got from MCG Textiles, Tearaway Waist Canvas 8.5 count. Okay, this one actually tells you to go up and down inside the tiny holes. It says to go in at 1 and out at 2 and in at 3 and out at 4. So it's telling you to use the tiny, tiny holes. And you can certainly do it that way. The way that I started doing it was obviously wrong, because I was going in and out through the big holes. If you look at this canvas closely, you will see that you have, where these cross, you have a little tiny hole right there in the center. I was going in and out through the big holes in here, and you can do that. I'm going to try doing it their way, going in and out through where the little threads cross. I think they want you to do it that way so that your X's line up all the way across. But you can certainly do it the other way. You just have to be super, super careful when you're pulling the thread through and coming up again, that you're coming up through the hole and not through another thread.
Right.
But in this case, you know, we're going to start our stitching. When you're working on a shirt, you're going to want to roll it up. You can clip your shirt out of the way. You're going to want to flip it over and clip the back out of the way, which is actually maybe more important than clipping the front. It's not really all that necessary. It's more for your comfort. I think that'll work for now. But you're going to clip it because you want to be able to hold it in your hand and have the excess fabric here and be going in and out. So my pattern is going to start actually 7 stitches to the left of center, because apparently the center is backstitch, and I'm not going to start with a backstitch. So I'm just going to start 7 stitches to the left of center. I'll put myself a little hole here, and now I'm going to come back in underneath, and there I am. See where my needle is? I'm right in between where the intersection is between the 2 horizontal ones and the 2 vertical ones. And that is where the instructions say to do this. So I'm going to follow the instructions, and I go top right to bottom left. I'm pushing my finger up to hold the back of it so I can actually push the needle through both the waist canvas and the fabric at the same time to try and keep the fabric more stable. You may want to use a thimble, but if you're using a tapestry needle, it shouldn't be a problem. And I'm going to catch all of my loops. Again, I'm using 3 threads to get better coverage, and then I should just be able to come up. I know it's hard to see, and yep, it's good. Just checking the back because it feels like there's kind of a knot back there.
It's probably just the loop start.
I think you're right, because there's just so many threads here. And going back down through the little hole.
You don't stitch with 6 threads every day?
No, I don't. I'll just stitch this row so you can see, coming up in between, and you do want to make sure you don't split those threads. And you see what I did there? I tugged it a little too hard, and I moved the waist canvas. So you don't want to tug too hard. You just want to do enough to get the stitches in. So here you can see there's my first row, and you can see that I'm going into the intersected corners. So we're going to continue to work on this. We'll move the hoop as necessary. You don't have to worry about the waist canvas when you move the hoop because it's not going to move. When you are finished, you're going to flip it over and you're going to bury your thread underneath just like you normally would. You do not have to do a knot to start. You do not have to do a knot to finish. Again, when this gets washed, the threads are going to slightly shrink and they're going to hold themselves together really nicely. They're going to lock in place. So you don't have to worry about that. But I would put it through at least 4 stitches, 5 stitches if you can, when you're burying your thread at the end of your row.
Bridget has stitched this entire project on this t-shirt. It looks fabulous.
Ta-da!
Buttons too. These are buttons, aren't they cute?
They are buttons.
What's next, Bridget?
The first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the basting thread. And the basting thread, as you'll recall, is plastic. So I'm very carefully just pulling. I don't know if you can see.
You gotta hold one end and then just yank on the other.
Yep. I don't even have to hold it, but I mean just pull it carefully out. And the nice thing about this red gridding thread is that you can reuse it.
You can.
So I just curl it up, I put it to the side.
Okay.
And then I'm going to take up the other side here. Let's see, I think it's easier to pull from the bottom. And see, it comes out so easy.
Cool, yeah.
Which you do have to be a little careful when you're pulling on stuff when you're stitching it, because you don't want it to come out that easy when you're pulling on it. I think I knotted it down here because I was getting near the end.
You probably just want to cut that.
I think I will just cut that because it doesn't really matter. I got a lot of this stuff. Come on,
I think you need to... Oh, I see.
It's going around the corner.
I see, wow.
Yep.
Comes right out.
Yep, it does. It pulls right out, and that's a nice big long piece that I'm going to be able to reuse. Keep going.
Do we trim this?
Actually, I don't trim it, and here's the reason why. If you trim it, you could trim it down to around a 1/2 inch, and some of the directions will tell you to do that. However, if you trim it, you might need tweezers to pull it out.
Oh, there's not enough to grab on.
Bingo. I'm just going to start pulling, and I just start pulling from the bottom or the sides or whatever. Right. Yeah. So if you want to work on one side, and I'll work on the other side.
So on the left and right side, we're pulling off the vertical fibers, and then on the top and the bottom, we'll be pulling off the horizontal fibers.
Yep. And you might want to have a trash can handy.
There's one right next to you on the floor.
I know.
Now, sometimes the directions tell you to wet the t-shirt, wet it first before you start pulling threads apart. What wetting it does is it loosens the glue that's holding the waste canvas fibers together. You don't always need to do that. Sometimes it just makes the fibers gummy and harder to pull out from under your stitches. So maybe start with it dry, and then if you have difficulty, you can move on to it wet.
You can pull 2 at a time on the sides, or if that turns out to make it too bunchy, you can just grab 1 at a time. And the ones that are on the edges will just come right off. And it is a lot easier to do your edges first. In fact, I don't even know if you can do it any other way. If you start in the middle, you're going to be fighting everything. It's much easier to go from the edge inside. So as you can see, these really do want to come right out. Now you're going to see where I signed and dated it at the bottom. So now I have to pull it straight, because you see it's pulling through my stitches here. So this is where we're going to start, just pulling through the stitches. Let's see if I can get some from the side. If you want to pull, whoops, okay, that happens. Sometimes it just snaps.
So do you just end up with like fibers underneath your stitches?
Well, you might end up with fibers under the stitches, and that's not the worst either. It'll eventually come out. That's why you have 2 sides. If it snaps on this side, you can pull it from that side, but it just means that you know that one in particular is somewhere in there. It's got a little stuck. So here's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull it a little bit like this.
Okay.
See how I'm kind of inching it out?
I see.
And now it comes out. And that's because you'll see these stitches right here are full coverage. That entire thread is covered. So that entire thread is a little more... Yeah, it's really in there.
Oh, that's working really well. Yep. I got it. I never would have thought of that inching technique. That's really working.
Yeah.
You're just sort of
That's not in the directions either.
No, I'm sure it's not.
No. That's called trial and error, which is why I say you might actually need tweezers. If you end up breaking the thread in the center somewhere, say you break a thread in here, or I've even seen people who cut the threads on the inside.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
Yeah.
Trim it here.
Okay, there's 2 schools of thought about that. If you trim the inside, yes, it does make for shorter threads. Yes, it does make it a little easier to pull out. But When you get in here, if you don't really have nails and you don't want to use tweezers, you're going to have a very short thread to hold on to pull.
Oh.
So sometimes it's going to work against you.
Oh.
I suggest just pulling the whole thread little by little like we're doing, because I have found that leaving the thread long and pulling it out a little bit at a time works much better. One thing I do want to mention is that when you're going along, try not to skip. Like, see, this thread is here and this thread is next to it. Don't go for these threads first. Try to go in a row, each thread in its turn, because it's easier. Just trust me, it's easier. And the more threads you pull out, the easier it gets. So the hardest part is always the beginning. Okay, we're coming to where I'm pulling out from the buttons, and I kind of expect it to be a little tighter, and yeah, it is, just a tiny, tiny bit tighter, because I had to sew the buttons on. So when I sewed the buttons on, I was also careful not to split these little fibers. But this is why I said, when you're stitching, don't use a sharp needle and be careful you don't split the fibers, because when you get to this part, you want to be able to get those fibers out. You don't want them to break because you put a thread through it, or break your thread. And did I mention we're only taking out one at a time? I know it might be tempting to grab 2 or 3, but...
Well, let me grab 2 or 3 and show you what happens. So here's 3. I can't even pull it.
Yeah.
It won't even come.
Yeah. Oh yeah, somebody is stuck. Looks like my back stitch might be splitting.
Uh-oh.
Yep. Okay. So let's see if I can identify where that split is. I'm going to go the reverse. I'm going to pull this up to here, pull it out this way instead, because I want to get a little more leverage right here. I can see it pulling tight right there. And then I'm going to pull the same thread from the bottom up. So now I'm just dealing with this one thread here, and this is the problem area right here.
It's definitely split. It would have come out.
Yep, and I think it's
so split. That means when we say split, it means that when she was stitching, she pierced the fiber with her needle as she was stitching, and this is why you got to be really careful not to do that.
Accidentally.
It happens.
Yep. So I am going to cut very, very carefully right here on the edge, and then I'm going to pull on this one, and that's yeah, so by pulling it back and forth, I was able to identify where it was stuck, and it was stuck right here in my back stitch.
Okay.
So I cut it right there, and that allowed the thread to be pulled out here.
Okay.
Now, if you do this and it's in the middle of the skep, or it's in the middle of here, where you see you have a lot more full coverage, so it's going to be a little tougher to pull these threads out, then you're going to need to probably leave it in or soak it in water. And maybe if you see this sticking out between your threads at some point, you can then tease it up and pull it out. But it's not a disaster if you leave it in.
No, yeah, you can just leave it in under the stitches. Nobody will know. Maybe over time it'll work itself out, but
if you can't see it, nobody else can see it either. So what we're having is a problem right here where my bees are, because remember these are 1 over 1, and I'm going to pull this same thread. That's why I've got the seam ripper, so I can identify this same one thread here. I'm going to try pulling it up from the bottom to this point, so that all I'm dealing with is the bee. If I can isolate where the issue is, it's a little bit easier. Now, let's see. Oh, see?
Oh, now it's coming right out.
Now it's coming right out. There was just too much drag. So I think I'm going to do the same thing with this next thread, since it's also got a bee. I'm going to go ahead and pull the thread from the center to here, and then pull it from the middle up. And now I've got enough to work with, and it will pull right out.
Nice.
Okay. Since I'm now dealing with the bees and the skep, I think I'm just going to pull these here out from the top. So I don't have to deal with the bees and the skep and the top. I can just pull these through. Once we get the top done, pulling the vertical ones out, then we go to the horizontal ones. You can see the horizontal ones are going to be a lot easier. Okay, so now we've got all these threads up here that are going to be for the bees and the skep, and I think they're going to be a little more fiddly, so I just wanted to get most of it out before we inch them out. And you see they're coming out a lot easier. We've got all the vertical ones out. And now, as you can see, the horizontal ones, some of them are already halfway out for you. This part goes a lot faster. Almost done. Last one. Woo! That was it.
We didn't even have to get it wet. She's very cute.
Yep, and there's our beads right there, all still intact. And there's our buttons. Now, if you think the beads are going to be a problem, if you have a beading project, you can sew the beads and buttons on after the waste canvas is gone, because you'll have your pattern to go by, to follow. And I will give this a good wash, and it will shrink the fabric just a little bit.
Because it's cotton t-shirt.
It's
so.
a cotton t-shirt, right? And so it'll shrink just a tiny bit, and it'll lock the stitches in. So I won't have to use fusible interfacing. I won't have to add anything to the back. I'm happy.
And we know this because she has t-shirts that are years old, never used fusible interfacing, and they're still fine. So that is how you cross stitch on a t-shirt using waste canvas. Until next time, stitch on.